Hello, welcome to the podcast, Human Rights in America, a Revolutionary Mindset. I am your host, Sue Young. Thank you for listening. And remember that this podcast is on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube, and Amazon Music, and now Audible. Like, listen, follow, subscribe, and listen over and over again. You can contact me with your questions on hrinamerica@gmail.com. That's HR, Human Rights in America, all one word, at gmail.com. So it's time for a celebration. This is my 4th episode. Hey, statistically, 90% of all podcasts never make it past episode 3. And when I reach episode 20, I'll be in the top 1% because most podcasts don't make it to 20. So for new listeners, those that are just joining, welcome to Human Rights in America, a Revolutionary Mindset. Today's episode is about reflection and healthcare. This episode was probably one of the hardest episodes to record because it dawned on me that this is a great undertaking, this revolution. Moving people from their comfort zones to action is huge. Who am I? I was reminded of my why for starting this podcast. I wanted to be the change that I wanted to see in the world. I know that sounds so corny, but it's true. I have no great technical skills or super important creative ideas. I'm not famous. Nor do I have a team behind me producing this podcast. Nope. It's just me and a microphone, and me learning how to use the microphone. It's me believing that Americans deserve more human rights. Human rights are the one thing that binds us to each American and each human on the planet. That is huge, to be reminded of our great common denominator. We actually have something in common with every human being on the planet. We don't have to wait for some apocalyptic movie to remind us of this. We are not as diverse as the animal kingdom, so this human thing ought to be a walk in the park, right? Nah, I think America can do better. There's no time like the present to bring this stuff up. Human rights won't put money in your bank account, put food on the table. But for me, it gives me back the power that I've given over to the news, social media, and the politicians. We the people, that's us. So I'm no longer afraid to stand alone in line. I started this podcast looking for a way out of our current mindsets. So will you join me in this revolution? I usually start with a motivational quote or question. I give you a roadmap and talk about my topic and close. In my first recording, I call it more of an introduction. I talk about me, who am I? But really, it was just my test ground for learning how to record a podcast. In episode 1, I gave you the history of the UN Declaration of 1948, starting with Eleanor Roosevelt. She was on the committee which was responsible for creating the document, the UN Declaration of 1948. In episode 2, I literally read the first 15 articles, the approved summaries for those articles found in the Declaration. And in episode 3, I read the last 15 articles, highlighting some more than others. Go back and take a listen. And what's going to be real fun? I have people that are not afraid to come on the program and talk to me about human rights. I can't wait. I will remind you that I think America should be the leader in human rights. We're not. And although we talk the talk, we haven't made the leaps and bounds from amending our Constitution to educating Americans or incorporating human rights into our laws. So I need to revisit an issue raised in our last episode. I talked about a lot of things, but I got some comments regarding homelessness in America. People were not so thrilled about how Houston was taking care of the homeless problem. Well, in episode 3, I actually talked about a lot of different things. Homelessness was one of the things I talked about, but this seemed to get the most attention. Yes, some of these rights are going to trigger you and perhaps make you retreat to your well-known boxes on the issue. I'm definitely not here to address any political stance one way or the other. Rather, I'm encouraging you to get out of your mental boxes that you've been in and put yourselves in tomorrow or years into the future and ask, what if? How do we push ourselves past the current thinking of today to get to creative freedom and change this country? If you find yourself stuck in your feelings, maybe work backwards so that you can be creative instead of stuck and paralyzed. You could pretend that we've already solved these issues and work backwards, asking yourselves, how do we do that? The first boss I had taught me that when you have an elephant-sized problem and you don't know where to start, just start. On the toes. You don't have to have the answer for everything just to get started. She also taught me that anytime you can identify a problem, that's important. That's a first step. But even more important is starting the next step, looking for a solution. A friend of mine in Denver told me, if you don't like something, change it. And if you can't change it, then change the way you think about it. I don't have the answers, but I think back to our framers of this country. They wanted to break away from a king and start from scratch. They weren't perfect. They were faced with divisive times, just like we are, and were faced with more dilemmas of their own. They owned slaves, but they created the framework for our democracy that has lasted 200 years and counting. I would like to revisit Article 25. You see, when I was reading the articles, I was reading the summaries, and it didn't stop me from just blasting through it. So I meant to stop and kind of give my little take on it. So I have to go back to it. The original version sounds a little bit better to me. It says that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including clothing, food, housing, and medical care, necessary social services, the right to Social Security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond your control. I believe that Americans deserve to have subsidized health care. After all, we are the foundation of this country. Health care should not be dependent on the work that we do. Our lives on this planet isn't a result of the work that we do. Here's a story. An older woman, a friend of mine, shared this story. She was in the middle of a current dilemma. She said she was either going to spend her savings for healthcare expenses later on, or she was going to buy a new car to get around. Well, she chose the new car. And I simply said in response, wow, I don't think Americans should have to make that decision. And without missing a beat, she instantly, emphatically said, but how would we pay for it? We can't follow the Australians because they have such high taxes. Our taxes that go up. And I was stunned because she was actually advocating against herself. She had just told me of the difficulty in making that decision. And I simply said, for Americans, I don't think that we should have to make those decisions. Look, there are 78 countries that provide free health care or at least cover 90% of health care for its citizens. Brazil is the only country that provides 100% free health care. Even India, with over 1 billion people, provide health care to its citizens. The U.S. joins 83 countries that don't. Whatever the real number is, the United States is one of the largest developed countries that does not provide any type of health care to its citizens. This is just my opinion, but most people live one bad illness away from bankruptcy in this country because our health care costs are skyrocketing unchecked. But I don't think the donut shop owner or the corporation were meant to subsidize the workers' health care. So, what if? In the 80s, people believed that we would become like Russia if we provided health care, so we did not do it. But some of the countries that do today are our allies. I think America hasn't done enough. Some countries have amended their constitutions to include the right to health care as a human right and then provide the health care. Some have incorporated the right into their constitutions, believe it, and aspire to cover health care. For us, the Affordable Health Care Act was the first step. Kind of like putting square wheels on cars, but I know we can do better than that. We have smart people, especially when any given day sportscasters tell us the 100-year stats from any sports. I know that someone can review how those countries provide health care to see if America can provide more. I don't have an answer. So I read inspirational examples of great Americans doing hard things and making difficult decisions when it was unpopular. So I read how Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. both turned to human rights during the Civil Rights Movement. Like Mandela stated, where there is poverty, there is no freedom. And reducing or eliminating poverty is not a charity. It is a human right. Healthcare is a human right. It's not flashy. It's not sexy to talk about. But I want to encourage you not to think about what you see presently, but rather what we can aspire to be tomorrow. We have to start somewhere. So I leave you with these last two quotes. Again, I'm just trying to motivate you and motivate myself at the same time. One is from Proverbs 4, 6, and 7. Do not forsake wisdom. She will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. I feel like That's where we are as Americans now. We're like, well, we've been living without these human rights all this time. Why do we need them now? Why should I care now? We are not just what we see on TV or social media. We are great leaders, inventors, scientists, philosophers, actors, dancers, dreamers, musicians, cowboys, life. A quote by MLK: "Communism forgets that life is individual. Capitalism forgets that life is social." And if I insert my reinterpretation at the end of this quote, the ideal of brotherhood lies somewhere in between the two. Humanity is the great denominator, no matter how we choose to function as society. I wanted to include the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but it would have made this episode too long. So next time, I'm going to address the Convention on the Rights of a Child. Then we'll go into the Constitution, and then I get to have my guest. A quote by Alice Walker: "The most common way that people give up power is when they don't think they have any." Until next time, be revolutionary.